they know when to kneel, when to stand, when to sit, when to kneel, how long to kneel, and I had no idea. The formal attire was something that was not normal to us. We came from not a lot of money, so suits and ties weren't part of our normal dress. And when you don't attend on a regular basis, you kind of feel like you're the outsider, that you don't belong in that environment. And I'd just say, my entire growing up, I felt that way with the church, of being an outsider who didn't fit in. And we moved around a lot, so there was no real stability in our home. So stability in a church home wasn't there either. So I never developed a group of friends inside of a church. Or outside the church. So that kind of brings me to age 17 and heading off to the military. Okay. And still not having a desire at all for spirituality or trying to figure out who God and Jesus is, other than getting pulled over and praying to God that I didn't get a ticket. So
I grew up going to church all my life. It was just something that we did. We had to go every Sunday, and went to youth group. I guess I just never knew the love of God. He was always just a punisher, and it was just something we did. We went to church every Sunday, went to youth group. But our family, we always fought. Seemed like every Sunday morning, and then we had to put on that fake smile. And so as a teenager, I was just ready to turn away because there was nothing for me. Till I met Scott, then I guess I was just kind of done with it, because I was just done with being punished. Even though I really wasn't punished, I didn't know why people went to church.
Okay. Just don't want that road noise to leak in. All right, where do you want to go from here?
where do we go? What's your direction?
I would just say, now just talk about, the military and how you just kind of went farther away from God, and together and separately, and
because you kind of went away too. So I find myself in the military, coming home on leave. My mom had found a church. She was having a lot of good times there. She had found some friends, and when I was on leave, invited me to come to church with her. Now I'm on my leave. I'm pretty hardcore, airborne paratrooper, recon squad leader, infantry soldier. I have no desire to go to church. My entertainment was found with wine and women. That was the only entertainment I knew. I had no desire for God. I had no desire to find out who this Jesus guy was. My addictions were spiraling out of control at this time. There was a huge void that I felt that I had a lot of ways of filling it and dealing with it. Came home on leave and was just looking forward to a few days of R&R and seeing what I could do tearing the town up. And my mom begged me to go to church with her. I said, "Are you serious? I have no desire." Until Mom said that there was a couple girls my age that attended there, and they were quite attractive. And that more than sparked my curiosity. That got me to put on my full dress uniform and attend a church with the only sole purpose of checking out these two girls. And they were sisters. It was even a better deal. So I find myself attending church and being drawn towards one of them quite strongly, wanting to definitely get to know her. And try to get rid of the thoughts that I had in my head, because I knew that probably wasn't good thoughts to have inside of this fancy building with this cross on it. So I asked Jane out on a date.
What do you think of this soldier?
I knew our parents were kind of setting us up for me to meet him. My mom, I think, was still worried because she didn't know if he was saved or not. But he showed up, and yeah, we went on our first date, and I just fell for him.
So this whole process of dating was dating via correspondence, through letters, and we pretty much had lost track of each other for a while. I was being shipped all over, wrote letters back and forth. Had reached a low point in drinking. I was out in New York training West Point cadets. Woke up one morning and said, I got to put an end to all this, and found Jane's phone number and called her. She was in California and said, I'm coming home on leave again, I'd like to see you again. She agreed to fly from California back to Minnesota just to see me again. And we realized at that point that we had something special, the two of us, that there was something that was being formed there, and that we didn't want to be without each other. We wanted to get married and make this a real thing. So we get married. The preacher man said that I had to go through a 2-week premarital class. I said, I'll give you 2 days. It turned out to be just an afternoon, and they pretty much figured that this young couple wouldn't make it. They had serious communication issues, is what their paper showed. Nobody had ever talked about being unequally yoked, and as I look back now, I realize, wow, why was that point never brought up? Because he had this young girl who had been raised in the church, raised by a Christian family. They had done everything correctly, and she was falling for a guy that was about the polar opposite of that. So, but when God's got something in mind, He works through it. And the 2 days after the wedding, I flew back to Alaska. I was going to finish my tour up there. I had to do, I think, 13 more months, and then I could fly back down and be with Jane, or I could volunteer to spend 3 more years up there, and they would fly Jane up there and provide housing. So I said, well, I'll just spend 13 months up here, and then we'll figure out what's after that. That lasted about 30 days, and I went and re-enlisted for another 3 years to get Jane back up there. I didn't realize how much I had missed her. So.
Yeah, once we were married, I just want to say that we weren't really totally different, because at the time I met him, I was doing my partying, and so, I think my parents still thought I was innocent, but I was ready to marry him and get away from the church. And
So now you moved to Alaska.
Yeah, tell us about your married life.
I didn't have a whole lot of money at the time when we got to Alaska. I was a single GI, didn't save anything, I spent it all, so I knew we needed a vehicle. So Jane had been a very fervent saver, and had some money in the bank, and said, you know what, I'll send you some money up so we can get a vehicle. So I buy a 1978 Jeep CJ that was jacked up on big 36-inch tires, 6-inch lift kit. This thing is massive. It is your true Alaska expedition vehicle. Not realizing that when I picked Jane up from the airport, that she's in the most beautiful dress you could imagine, with dress shoes on, and looks at the Jeep and says, how am I going to get in there? So life in Alaska starts. Newlyweds have no idea what to do. I would say the partying starts then. Now it's game on. I have a partner to party with. I'm playing in a band. There's a lot of drugs around, and in the military you're getting urinalysis on a regular basis, except for cocaine. They check for that, but that's usually gone in 48 hours. So we figured out how to time it correctly so you didn't get caught. Still no spirituality, no God, no Jesus. We're as a couple as far away from that. It's not even on our radar at this point.
Yeah, and up in Alaska when we were married, I think just the military was really hard on me. And yes, we did our parties, and I got he was gone a lot, and sometimes he'd go party by himself. So then I thought, well, I'm gonna go party with my friends. And so, Scott's shared a lot of stories about all the drugs that he was in, but in Alaska, I was hooked on cocaine, and Scott was the one that gave me the ultimatum. It was the cocaine or him. So I've never shared that because I've never done my testimony, but so it's not all him, it was me too. We were far from God.
When does your son come along? How far into the marriage was that you got pregnant? And
That's after we moved back from Alaska.
okay.
So we decided to get out of the military. We drive back from Alaska to Minnesota in the middle of January in a 2-wheel drive pickup truck. And when you're 22, you don't think about all the things that could go wrong driving from Anchorage to Minnesota in a 2-wheel drive truck. Great adventure. Come back to Minnesota, both get full-time jobs, build a house. I mean, we are doing the proverbial little white picket fence, and decide to have a kid, to bring a kid into this. And through the course of trying to have a kid, we have 2 miscarriages and a stillbirth. And we have a little baby girl that Jane had to deliver that had passed away inside. And I remember that probably being probably one of the lowest points in my marriage of screaming out at God. I remember it's downtown St. Paul, looking out at a smokestack going, I'd tear that thing down brick by brick. I was so mad. I was mad at God. How could he do this? We deserved to have a kid, and we had one and it died inside. How could this be? How can we go through all these miscarriages? Why? And I just remember being angry man at that point. Probably not the most loving, caring, nurturing husband for my bride that I could have been. Goes on, and we end up finally the insurance company put some money into the situation. We were able to find out what's going on. There's not a hormone that's being created, and they can supplement this, and we end up having a pregnancy that goes all the way to the very end. We're at 9 months. We're going to do emergency C-section at the very end, and I'm still scared as they deliver him. He's not breathing, and just make him right, and we have this beautiful baby boy. Remarkable that it all turned out the way it was supposed to.
Anything you want to say about that?
Your version of that.
Yeah, I was mad at God too after having the miscarriages, and yeah, he was very angry, and but even with all that, I would still pray, and I still wished my life was, with God and that we were going to church, but I don't know why we didn't. But yeah, when we finally had Zach, I think that was a turning point. We settled down.
We settled down. You might have settled down, but
Well, we were still.
I don't remember me settling down a whole lot still.
Yeah.
There was still a lot of partying going on. There was still a lot of drug use. I was traveling all over the United States at this time, climbing smokestacks, checking for pollution. But I'm from one coast. I'm leaving on Sunday nights, coming home late Fridays. Still a lot of absentee between the two of us, which led to a lot of bars and a lot of drinking with the guys. It was every night, it's a group of 5 or 6 guys, and you're hanging out and living in motels and airplanes. And it's just a horrible environment, especially when you're lonely. It's just a horrible environment to put yourself into. And this went on for several years. Probably till the point where my son I started realizing I was missing something at home. It wasn't a baby anymore. He was a little man. It was my little buddy, and I didn't want to leave him. Through all that, we get involved in some sports. We end up moving back up to Grand Rapids and have a little house in the country. And he starts to ask some weighted questions that I didn't really know how to answer. Things like, who is God, and what happens when you die? And right about then, we had lost my mom's third husband, who he was pretty close with. Him and Grandpa Ed had spent a lot of time together, fishing and mowing grass together and doing stuff like that. And when Grandpa Ed died, I couldn't answer them questions, but I knew that to be a really good dad, my heart's desire was to be the best dad there was. I had 3 great examples of what not to do as a father, and I was going to do something different. I think God listens to your heart, even though you don't look at your actions. He knows deep down what's going on in there. There's a resounding question, and how do I answer these questions that I really don't have the answers for myself? So I would say, you went to church all the time. Explain it to him.
Yeah, I guess I tried to, but that's when I realized that we really should be bringing him to church, going back to church. And
So our answer wasn't to seek God, it was to go to a church. That's what you do. That's where God's at. He's in the church, and you got to go to church, and you got to go every Sunday, and you got to dress up really nice, and you got to tell everybody everything's going good, because you don't want people to think that your life is not going good, that there's still a lot of bad in your life. So we end up dabbling, really not making an effort. Mom invites us to go to her church. She found this very good church, a great preacher. She's just having a great time. I'm like, oh, all right. I think back in retrospect now, last time Mom asked me to church, I ended up finding a pride. We'll see what happens this time. So we go into church, and I just remember that all that people did was sing. They're singing, and their singing carried on. I got bored, I opened the Bible, and I read Psalm 51, not realizing what God was doing through His Word, that He was going to pierce my heart with that. It was David's confession about an adulterous and affair, and how he sinned against God, and how he brought God a broken heart, and God fixed him and made him right. And David said, I'll go on later to teach people about you, God. Pondering this and not knowing what's going on, as I walked to the back of the church, and the pastor caught me and said, where are you at? And it was God asking me that question. A real quiet little voice just saying, where are you? And I was broken at that point. People talk about going forward to an altar call and giving their life to Christ, and that wasn't mine. Mine was different. It was God just touching me on the shoulder and saying, I know who you are. I know your name, and I know everything about you. I've heard every prayer you ever prayed. And I bawled. And my son, who thinks his dad's the hardest man on the planet, is standing next to me trying to figure out why Dad's crying. And I remember Jane taking him aside and just leaving him with the pastor. So that was the moment. People talk about giving their life to Christ. I don't know if I ever really gave my life to Christ, but I know that moment in time is when God started to do a transformation in my life. Me as a man, me as a father, me as a husband.
where should I go from there?
What are you watching through all this?
Yeah, that day when God touched him, I was really happy, that we were going back to church. But there was still a part of me that it was just the thing to do, and I didn't know why I wanted to go back to church so much, because it was just, I don't know.
So, we start there. God didn't take every issue, every problem, or every inconsistency I had in my life, and all of a sudden we start going to church. It's a process. Start realizing that we need to start going to church. Not realizing why we need to go to church, but just that we need to go to church. That's kind of where we started. Same church that my mom had originally invited us to go to. Started attending on a regular basis. And one of the biggest influences early on in my walk was the fact that I owned my own business. And I could put on the radio whatever I wanted. So I put Christian radio on and I listened to sermons 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. And it was just being filled with God's Word and having a revelation almost daily of what a loving God we have, and how this punisher that I thought he was, this God who I have to obey, these 10 rules he has, because that was the only knowledge I had. There's 10 rules, and I had a hard time with about 9 of them. Well, okay, 10. But realizing that there's a relational God up there, and that there was a Jesus that really died for me to make it right with God, so that he doesn't see my sin. 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, for weeks on end, being filled with God's Word. Coming home and sharing it, and having my wife say things like, "How come you just get it and I don't? It's not fair. I was raised in a church. I should get it, and you're getting way more than I don't understand how you're figuring it out. I never figured it out. And I went to Sunday school all the time." And what I realized as a husband was, she's not understanding the relational side of God. She still sees this God as a punisher. This God is going to get her. This God who you got to keep the rules. There was a change in how I viewed my marriage at that point. God was slowly starting to show me that I had a job to do, and that he would do it through me. That he would reveal who Jesus is, and how much love he has, by transforming my life and watching Jane see it right before her eyes. With her being the closest to me, seeing the man that was the farthest away from this, to seeing how God can use this, how he can change, how he can pour into me, and it will all overflow onto her. So.
Yeah, I'd have to say, when he was always listening to the radio, he was my mentor. I thought it was crazy. Like, wow, you're learning so much. And it just kind of made me think, why all the years of our marriage, and I was a Christian, never did I once thought to bring him to Christ. And that just struck me hard, that, I should have been the one. But yeah, he was just teaching me all kinds of things just really fast. He was observing it. And yeah, it was unbelievable how fast he grew.
So we end up definitely feeling moved by the Spirit to look for a different church. Was not being fed what I felt scripturally was the proper way. I don't know about proper. Focus. Churches can focus on different things. We can focus on gifts, or we can focus on the Word, or we can focus on different things. So I felt God definitely moving us along and saying, I'd like you to go check out a couple other churches in the area. So we begin to church shop, I called it. And it was funny because when we church shop, we look to see, what does the church have for us to get? What do they have? What programs do they have? How can I be filled here when we go to this church? It was all about us. It was about me. It was about Jane. It was about Zach. What does this church have? Not looking at it with what can I do for the church, but what can the church do for me? I needed my needs met. And that's how we church shopped. Looked at a couple in the area and finally came here and had a long sit with Phil Shank, who was the current pastor at the time. And he says, Scott, what you're feeling, what you're discerning, you're spot on, and we'd love to have you here. Here's the programs we have, here's what we got. And so we started attending E-Free. All of us were game on. It was a great time. We were figuring it out. But I didn't have anybody in my life mentoring me. Jobs had changed. I could no longer listen to my radio all day long. I was in some tough environments working where Christian radio would have been mocked the whole time. So ultimately what happened was I wasn't being discipled anymore. And it was easy to lose focus, lose sight of Jesus and the cross, and start putting other things higher on the priority list. So which resulted in skipping church for a Sunday. And and then resulted in skipping for a couple Sundays, and then resulted in being gone for probably close to 2 years. And definitely knowing that I was misbehaving, that I wasn't walking where I knew I needed to walk, where I should be walking, where the Holy Spirit was convicting me to walk, but I chose to do different. And it was easy for my son and my wife just to follow right along. Not looking at me and saying, we should be going to church, and we should be. No, it was just, well, if Dad's not going to go, none of us need to go. Until one day, Tom Geisler actually walked into a shop that I was working at and said, "Hey, we're just kind of wondering what you got going on." Yeah, you're right, Tom. I'm not going where I need to be going, and I should be coming back. But when you decide to come back to a church, it's tough, especially after you've been away, and those doors are, you don't want to walk through. And it's all a pride issue with me, is what it was. What are people going to think about me, and what are they going to wonder, and what are they going to say? And not realizing that God's standing there as the prodigal son comes home with his arms wide open, and he's rejoicing that the son is coming home. I remember sitting in a different church as they were making a plea to put any drummers in the audience, any drummers that would please come, because they had a void on their worship team. And my son elbowed me and says, "Dad, there you go. They need a drummer." And I remember clearly God saying, "E3 needs their drummer back." So the three of us, the following Sunday, hand in hand, made probably one of the longest walks I think I've ever made. And I was walking back through the doors of E3. Except when I walked back this time in them doors, my question is, it's not what can the church do for me, it's what does the church need? And how can I wholeheartedly serve with every gift and talent and ability that I have? How can I serve the church? And how can I model that for my wife and my son both to serve the church, to serve the kingdom, to figure out how to advance this, how to get the good news out to more people like me who were so far away, and realizing God can come in and He can transform that life in slow little steps. I believe if God would have come in and transformed my life radically in 60 seconds, it probably would have scared the crap out of me. I would have ran away. There would have been a protection in there. And God just slowly and softly started changing things in my life. He put a mentor in my life, which, as I look back now, is probably one of the most profound things there were. I had mentors in Christian radio of listening to these pastors every day feed me. Well, now I had one on a personal level who was willing to invest time. He was willing to meet with me on a regular basis, willing to challenge me, challenging me to not only be discipled, but to become a discipler, to take that knowledge and wisdom that's being passed on to me and pass it on to somebody else.
What was it like coming back for you, Jane?
It was a good thing, a good feeling, but I was still didn't really have like a relationship with God. But I was glad that we were going back, and I think it makes such a big difference if your husband is the leader and brings you back. And I was just going to come back and say, this is me, I'm not perfect, but I want to be back here just as I am. It just made a big difference.
When did the relationship part start for you?
I don't really know exactly when. I mean, Scott was teaching me so much, so I think he was the one that was helping me bring down my walls and saying, God loves you just how you are and just where you are. And I realized that because of how I seen God. Just love Him, where we were, where He was.
The marriage there was never this really big moment when I could say, okay, all of a sudden the marriage was here and now the marriage is here. But over time, the more you realize that, the more I realized that God had created me, that He had made me, that He had planned all this out, that He loved me unconditionally. I looked at my wife and said, He did the same thing to her. That's His daughter. And how dare I remember one time speaking some harsh words, and the Holy Spirit say, how dare you talk to my child that way? That's my daughter. That's my daughter, and you're talking to her. I'm like, you're right. I'm talking to God's daughter like this in a very inappropriate way. And who am I? So it was little things, little convictions, I believe, like that over time when the Holy Spirit comes in and says, you know what? That wasn't a very nice thing to say. That wasn't a very nice thing to do. Why don't you just go back and ask for forgiveness? Why don't you just go back and say, hey, I didn't mean that, and then walk away, because it was better than not saying nothing at all. So over time, God really started to soften my heart, to look at her saying, you know what, where is she spiritually? She's not where you're at. How can you help her out a little bit, just to help her show who I am through your acts? So God's basically speaking and saying, I want to demonstrate who I am through you. I'm like, well, that means I had to be really nice. I had to be really polite. God's like, I know. Like, you're joking, right? This is me. Can we do it some other way? Isn't it like some woman in the church she could meet with and she could talk to? And it'll. But when we started viewing our marriage that way, things started to really change. Probably a profound moment for me was when my mentor handed me a book, and it was called The Marriage Builder. I'm like, he said, this is probably going to be a little bit above your reading level. I'm like, yeah. I'd come to realize the book was the notes from a doctor who teaches this class on marriage, and these were just his notes. So, but the premise of it sank right to my heart, is what God needed to reach me and say, do you view your marriage as a ministry? I thought, wow, a ministry, my marriage a ministry. God says, you know, your first ministry I've given you is your family. Wow. It wasn't worship team. That wasn't the first ministry He gave me. The first ministry was my wife. And if I take care of that ministry, other ministries will come along. I'll be able to serve in the kingdom in other ways. But if I'm not willing to serve my wife in that aspect, I don't think He's going to bless me in any other ministry He really used me if I'm not taking care of the first one. So I really approached it with that type of attitude of, how can I minister to my wife? Because as a husband looking at a believing wife, raised in a church, I thought, how come you don't get it? You don't get this? But not realizing that no one had ever discipled her. She had never been mentored. So I approached my marriage in that way. And how can I help her know who Jesus is and who God is and what His Word really says? And it's been remarkable watching some walls go down. When I talk about my walls weren't quite as high as her walls were when it came to God. She had been raised in a church, and these walls she had were big and huge. Being raised in a church, my walls came down a little quicker because I really wasn't, I don't know how to really explain it. I didn't have all man knowledge of God. I had just what the Spirit was revealing to me. It's been fun watching her walls come down. It's just been a joy. I had to be there several times just to go ahead and say, it's okay that you felt that way. It's okay but now look where you're at. So, for me, some of the biggest things were having a mentor in my life, having somebody I was willing to be vulnerable with, to share my life with on an intimate level, trusting that person, and being receptive to them speaking in my life and saying, well, this is what I think God is doing, or this is or here, read this book. Thus, also taking that and discipling somebody else. Not just taking from somebody, but actually passing it on. So having a couple young men in my life that I can speak in their life the same way my mentor speaks into my life, I can speak down into their life. And I learn a lot by doing that, becoming that person. So that and to continually being a learner, realizing that there's an infinite amount of knowledge and wisdom out there from some wonderful Christian people who have been around for a while and have learned some things and have gone through some trials and tribulations, but to take that knowledge that they gained through that and be able to pick some of that out and use what God has in there for me to be able to apply it to somebody else's life. So those two things, having somebody in my life speaking into somebody else's, and to continue to be a learner, and be open to the Spirit's promptings. I remember the first time as a young Christian ever praying for somebody. I was being challenged with, you got to be able to pray for people. And okay, God, let me pray for people. I want to do that. So I was doing advertising with a radio person at the time, and she came in my shop, and I said, I haven't seen you for a while. She said, yeah, I kind of got some bad news. I said, oh, what's that? She said, well, it said I got breast cancer, and I got to go in and have a biopsy. I said, oh, can I pray for you? And she says, I would love it if you pray for me. She didn't realize that I meant right now that we were going to bow heads right there. She just thought that she was going to go on and I'd pray for her. But I said, okay, let's bow our heads. And she bowed her head, I prayed, and she wept uncontrollably for about the next 8.5 minutes. And I realized the power of prayer. God is reaching out to anybody. He wants to use us daily in our walk. He wants to show people Jesus through us. And that I may be the only Jesus somebody sees. And what do I do at that time?
Where do I start now?
What about your walls? Last time you talked about how you wish they had come down sooner, so talk about your walls.
My walls. I had a lot of walls. Even when we got married, I had walls against Scott. And that was the hardest wall to break. It was a hard wall. I mean, even though I loved him, but and then going to church and stuff, he mentored me a lot, but I still had them walls. I still have a few walls, and I've just been learning so much to put them down, and he's challenged me to get out of my comfort zone, which isn't easy, but I'm learning. But I guess my only regret is that I've learned about, making relationships and making them intentional and, making a difference, which is really hard for me. But now that we're leaving, I regret not making more and making those relationships deeper. I think that's what I would say, how important that is, and to have a mentor and learn to mentor somebody else.
So you guys are going off to Seattle? Your son and his wife live there, and just talk a little bit about that.
So, what's really interesting is I look at my journey of originally walking through the doors here, being what can a church give for me, and through this church, through this local body, being transformed by God here, and a lot of great people around me to the point where I've preached 6 sermons and haven't been booed once. Now God says, I got something else for you. So we've sold everything we own pretty much, and we're heading to Seattle, Washington to start the next chapter of this book God's writing. Never seen it coming, didn't realize that. I mean, as an elder here, thinking I'm going to serve out my time here at E-Free and just watch this great thing God's doing here, and he's like, no, I got some other place for you. So, heading out, going to see my son and his wife are there. They're newlyweds, had their first wedding anniversary. They're all serving in their local church. Definitely feeling called to maybe go back to school to work on a leadership or pastoral degree in some manner, try to get a little more wisdom and knowledge for the pulpit. Looking for a church that we can walk into and say, what is it you need? Because we're here to serve the kingdom. Can't wait to see the look on that pastor's face when I walk in and say that. But looking at an area of our country that definitely needs more Jesus in it. In fact, I can't think of a more prominent place than out on the coast where Jesus loving people need to be preaching his gospel of good news. And realistically, you don't have an idea what that looks like, but we're willing. We're united in our agreement that here we are, Lord, use us. The harvest is plentiful and the workers are few, but it's time to go harvest.
Yeah, I'm really eager to find a church and figure out what God wants us to do. I've got enough courage now that I just want to go out there and I want to touch lives and get involved and make a difference. Yeah.
Awesome.
Could you
It is
record it?
I recorded it.
You got